Hello, students, and welcome to week 5. Week 5 is the second part of physiology chapter, or topic rather. And so for this week, we're going to be reading chapter 4 in your Murray, Pope, and Willis text. The chapter is entitled Physiology and Sexual Health. And so last week, we talked a lot about the specific body parts and functions and all of that stuff. This week, it's going to get into some of the dysfunctions that can happen and get into more information on safe sex, pregnancy, infertility, abortion, STIs, all kinds of wonderful stuff. And so with the textbook chapter, like I said, it's Physiology and Sexual Health. It does go over a very brief review of physiology and anatomy related to sexual function. Again, you kind of went over that last week. It gets into information on how different safe sex programs are identified and what they include and things like that. And so that's definitely a much debated topic in our world. It does have an overview of like the history of like contraception and safer sex practices, just kind of things that have changed a little bit over the years and some things that we have. And then it goes into sort of why we have those methods of contraception and safe sex treatments is because of the reality of sexually transmitted infections. And with some things, you're going to still see it called STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. Quite a number of years ago, the terminology changed to STI, sexually transmitted infections, which is a little bit more accurate. And so it does go over a number of different ones. It talks about AIDS and HIV, which there's going to be some additional resources in this announcement with this video on that. And the way things have changed. I mean, I remember growing up and, AIDS was this relatively new thing and they were still learning a lot and there was a lot of money put into education and all of that stuff. And then as the number of cases decreased, there was a lot more money and funding for those kind of things. And then the number of cases started going back up again because less people had accurate information, less people were informed, and research and treatment and stuff like that wasn't as heavily funded. Strangely enough, one of the biggest growing populations of STIs and HIV is the elderly population. People are living longer lives and, they get back into the dating pool after, so many years of, not having to think about protection and stuff. There's obviously not the risk of pregnancy when individuals are of a certain age. And so they're less likely to use protection. So it's kind of I don't want to say a fun fact for you, but so this chapter includes exercise 4.1, which is a small group activity working with clients living with STIs or HIV. And of course, it's a little hard for us to do things in groups, but perhaps you can try to adapt it and do it on your own or find some other individuals you can work on it with, and just kind of identify different beliefs that are out there that people hold about STIs and HIV and AIDS, and identify misconceptions about intimate relationships and sexual behavior, and then generate a list of contextual factors that may influence people's vulnerability to HIV and STIs. And then when you're looking at what you created in those steps, how do those statements influence your conceptualization of beliefs and biases that you recognized were apparent in that step 1? And how does examining the social discourses surrounding sex and contextual factors help you to personally challenge the beliefs and biases that maybe you believed or thought to be true? And so it's a good exercise, again, to kind of challenge some of our biases and beliefs and get accurate information and stuff like that. Next, it gets into medication side effects and sexual functioning, and how, if you have clients complaining about issues with sexual functioning, it might be a good idea to talk about what medications are on and what other kind of health factors they may have, because those can play a huge part in their sexual functioning. And this includes psychotropic medications. So medications they may be taking for depression and anxiety and things like that have big side effects. And so there is a table that has some commonly used medications and some of the side effects that can be present. It continues to talk a little bit about chronic illness and disability, and there's going to be a resource below, I think I'm going to put it in this week, about sex and disability. That is really important, because a lot of times people will assume that, you know, if someone is disabled, that they somehow don't have sexuality, or that goes away, or that's not as important, when in fact it still is a big part of and very important in many people's lives. And so how do we help them to adapt, and how do we adapt as a culture and as a profession to help people that may have struggles that, you know, maybe we could supply some simple solutions or different avenues that they can try. The next exercise in this textbook talks about working with a client with sexuality concerns related to cancer, and this one can be a difficult one because you know, cancer, different types of cancer are prevalent in our population, and can really affect people different ways, and the treatments for cancer can affect people in different ways. And so this can definitely come up as a course of treatment, because you may be working with clients who are diagnosed with cancer, or are partners of people who are diagnosed with cancer. Next, it gets into reproductive health, which I told you we would talk about here: pregnancy, infertility, and all of those different factors that are involved, the ways that this can impact us, and the different things that can impact our ability to be fertile or conceive. It talks about abortion and the decisions that sometimes people make with, or the factors that people weigh in when they make the decision about whether or not to have an abortion. And then there's the exercise on an ethics discussion, counseling a woman considering abortion. And there can also be cases in my situations. I actually have not counseled women considering abortion, but I have counseled men who either were trying to make the decision along with their partner, or who had partners who made the decisions without them, and things like that. And so there's a lot of different factors that can be at play. And so that is it for that chapter. It kind of goes over things with sort of a broad brush stroke. And so we have a number of chapters in our Bueller textbook to read this week. So the first is Healing Painful Sex. And so this is going to talk about different sexual pain disorders and things like that that can have an impact on clients, and some of the psychological fallouts of that. It lists very specific diagnoses such as vaginitis, vulvovaginal pain, and endometriosis. I mean, it just goes on and on. Most of these are related to people who have vulvas and vaginas. There are some that can be present in those with penises, and so they are not excluded from this conversation. It talks about physical therapy and mental health treatment, how they can play in and be helpful with these different things, even though they may be considered medical conditions. Sometimes the mental health aspect is a big part of it, but it's showing up in like a psychosomatic way. And so that's that chapter. Again, as always with these chapters, I love at the end we have takeaway points, we have some activities you can engage in, resources, and references. This particular chapter also has some addendums to it on understanding pain management and what outer course is, because there are actually a lot of couples who engage in outer course because intercourse is actually too painful, which goes back to our conversation about what is sex and how can we broaden our definition of what sex is beyond just penis vagina sex, right? Next chapter is on sexuality and reproduction. Again, a topic that was introduced in the MPW textbook that's going to be expanded upon on here. It talks a lot about sexual dysfunction, infertility. I love the case studies that they include in here. Sex problems related to infertility, and also the effect that it has on couples' intimacy, which can be a big factor that is included in this as well. I apologize for that interruption. So the textbook goes on to talk about sexuality in regards to pregnancy and the postpartum period, which is really important because there can be a lot of changes in the individual that may have given birth, but also within the other partner. And so how do we navigate those changes and those changing roles and stuff like that? There's this whole field of counseling related to perinatal mental health and all of the effects of reproduction and leading up until pregnancy, which could include infertility and sexual dysfunction problems, and then throughout pregnancy and then after, and how much changes in those time periods. And so really important chapter. We have our takeaway points, some activities, resources, and references, and then there's an additional resource at the end, sex after baby, which can be a big topic with some of the individuals who've given birth. This is followed up by chapter 15, which is sexuality and medical problems, which again was kind of brushed with a very broad stroke in the Murray, Pope, and Willis book. This talks about the effects of illness on both relationships and sexuality. It talks about very specific ones like cancer, which was brought up in the other text. Also chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, diabetes, and these different illnesses, neurological disorders, skin disorders that have an impact on or can have an impact on sexuality and may be an important part of the conversation. Talks about some ways that you can do assessment with that, takeaway points, activities, resources, and references as always. And then this has a couple additional addendums to the chapter: preparing to engage in sexual activity, tips for coping with chronic illness and cancer together, so individuals who are in partnership. And then the final chapter that you're going to be looking at in the Bueller textbook this week is chapter 16 on sexually transmitted infections. And so it goes into a little bit more detail about the different common sexually transmitted infections. Again, the Murray, Pope, and Willis book kind of talks of it very general, doesn't get into a lot of detail. This one gets into a little bit more. It includes how to talk to couples about STIs, which may be a topic that they're unwilling to bring up, and it is very important to bring up, or something that they don't know a lot about. Chapter again has takeaway points, activities, resources, and references, and then it has a final addendum on preventing STIs. And so we do have a lot of content to cover this week. Some of it may be a review for you. Maybe you have some of this knowledge, but maybe not all of it. And so, definitely, scan over the chapters that maybe you have a lot of knowledge in, but make sure that you're taking a look at them, and especially looking into more detail on the ones that you don't. All of these covers will be a part of your next quiz. I will be posting study guides again, but there could be information from any of them on there. So make sure that you're taking a look at them. So the next things for week 5 are, we have 2 assignments to do. First is the discussion post for this week. Our discussion post is related to the topic of pregnancy, specifically with infertility. And so you're going to watch a movie online. It's called Modern Baby. There's a link for it in your discussion post. Once you complete that movie, there's some reflection questions in there. You can kind of talk in general about what your thoughts were. Did you learn anything new or different? Were you surprised by anything or not? What might you do if you had some of these individuals as clients? What kind of things do you still feel like you need to learn about this area in order to be able to work with clients going through this? So I think that's a pretty good discussion topic to get into, since again, this is something that you will likely end up running into at some point during your career, or potentially run into. And then we have our sexual interview reflection paper due this week. And so make sure that not only did you complete the interview itself, do not record anything, do not share information from your peers with me. None of that stuff should be sent to me in your reflection. Your reflection should focus on what it was like to sit with another person, maybe general themes that came up, also what it was like for you to share, what it was like for you to observe, what are things that you feel like you need to continue to grow and learn in order to have these conversations and ask these questions with clients. And so I really look forward to your reflections on that. Hopefully you feel like you gained something really beneficial from this assignment. And so that is due this week as well. So we have both of those this week. And again, below this video, I'm going to be posting some additional resources for like the lecture portion of our week that are going to connect with the topics that you're reading in your textbook. So have a great week, and you will see me again, I guess, next week for week 6, because we don't have another Zoom till week 7. So have a great week. Thanks.